everyone, welcome. I'm so happy to welcome you to this conversation, to this webinar, to this Explore Mars webinar, in which we're going to have a very interesting conversation about the next private journey to Mars, a mission that is completely privately funded and that will take us to Mars. So my name is Ana Cristina Olvera. I'm a science communicator, former communications officer for the Mexican Space Agency, right now collaborating with the National Mexican University and NASA en Español to create outreach materials in Spanish. And I have the honor today to present Barry Matsumori. He is the Chief Operating Officer at Impulse Space, and he has been an executive leader at SpaceX, Virgin Orbit, and most recently, he also was the CEO at Bridgecom. He also was an early Qualcomm employee, so he has quite an experience. And right now, he is creating with Impulse Space this new journey to Mars, in which we will be able to reach the red planet in a much, much cheaper way. Barry, thank you very much for having this conversation with us today.
Great to be here.
So right now we're going to watch a quick video to get a general idea about this mission. So that's a very exciting video. But before we start talking about the mission itself, and of course, this very important alliance with Relativity Space, tell us a little bit more about you. How does it feel to be one of the pioneers creating this new access to space in which very much everyone can participate? How has it been for you, this journey in all these companies that have been creating new ways to get to space?
First of all, thanks for having me, but I very much feel like I'm a pioneer along with all kinds of people that have made this possible. And certainly folks like NASA have done this mission several times over, and we're going to be able to partner and learn a lot from them. So it's not as if we're just doing this by ourselves. There's been a lot of work done prior to us to make this all happen.
I'm sure about it, but having right now companies that are privately funded and that are enabling for everyone. We were talking about having universities, even high schools participate in space endeavors is very, very important. First of all, tell us a little bit more about Impulse Space. Why Impulse Space?
Great. Let's go to the name first. And Impulse Space was really a brainchild of Tom Mueller. Tom Mueller was one of the founding members of SpaceX. He, Elon, and another actually founded SpaceX back in 2002. He left SpaceX in 2020 and decided that there was some work to do. It began developing propulsion systems, and before you know it, I had some sponsors that said, you should do something. So he created the company. I came on board. Tom and I talked early on, and I came on board to help him run the company. And so it was really an irresistible opportunity to be able to do not only this Mars mission, but also just create an in-space transportation network.
So tell us a little bit more about what is Impulse doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Impulse, we had the notion that there's lots of capability from going Earth to orbit. Where there was a need was not only to do in-space transportation, but do it much more broadly. And so we've created a transportation service that will be facilitated by small, medium, and large vehicles. In other words, our small vehicle is very much like what everyone else has for in space. But in order to really put a transportation network together, one needs to be able to accommodate not only the orbits, the varied orbits that people need to go to, but also the masses. So whether you need to go from LEO to LEO somewhere to a custom orbit, LEO to GTO, geostationary transfer orbit, or to a lunar orbit or to a Mars orbit, those take different vehicle configurations. And the way we are set, we can mix and match our vehicles to meet the missions that are necessary.
That's so interesting, but also you have set your eyes on Mars. I mean, we've been dreaming of Mars ever since Schiaparelli saw that structures, and we all imagined that we would find a civilization. I mean, we have already figured that that's not the case, but of course we want to settle on Mars. We want to have a continuous presence of humans on Mars. Why and what made you, as Impulse Space, have this decision of focusing on Mars?
It's a straightforward one. We partnered with Relativity Space early on, and they had a desire to go to Mars. We wanted to support that notion, and so we teamed together. Why Mars? Because Mars is a destination that we all still believe is a place for humans to go. We also believe that there's a lot of work to do in advance of any humans going there. And so for us, being able to get there early, being able to do multiple missions, looking at landing sites, being able to put sensors, for example, methane sensors to look for life forms, other kinds of sensors, that doing all that in anticipation of a broader human's presence on another planet is simply something that we wanted to do.
That's very inspiring. Tell us a little bit more about how you ignited that passion of participating in space endeavors. I mean, Mars looks like a very big goal. How do you keep that flame going?
First of all, I think it's funny you called it Ignite. So anyway, let's look at it this way. Space is a frontier that's very much just like the frontiers that have existed on this planet in the past. And all frontiers, they start with early people doing journeys, one-off missions, and it does that, but it doesn't scale until infrastructure is starting to be built. Infrastructure is communications, transportation, and some other accommodations. And we're just building that infrastructure, not only for around Earth orbit, not only for lunar orbits, but also for Mars. So communications, the deep space network already exists. It definitely needs improvement, but it does exist. But transportation is something that still needs a bit of improvement. And that's part of what we will do. Building that infrastructure, I'll overuse that term, allows for the commercialization, the growth of what can happen in Mars.
I think that's very important. We've been talking for decades now about the new space, the movement of the new space, and we thought that these would only work like for low Earth orbit missions and things like that. But Impulse Space with Relativity Space and other companies are opening new space for deep space missions like Mars.
Right. Right.
So tell us a little bit more what you're thinking about. What kind of payloads could be delivered to Mars by Impulse and Relativity?
First of all, I'll clarify what has happened in the past is various governments have gone to Mars, and a large part of the expense they spend is on transport, nothing to do with the science. And if what we can do is make the transport part much more efficient so that the scientists can actually focus on science, it helps everyone. And to that end, and to what you're getting at, across the board, whether it's for scientists at major government entities, to universities, to students, that kind of access is possible. And as a payload, it doesn't have to necessarily be something large like a rover. It can just be a sensor, a optical, varied spectrum sensor, you name it, that can add to the science of what's going on with Mars. And one more thing is, if one does a repeat of multiple missions, not necessarily very large multi-ton missions, but smaller missions, and spread them across the planet, one gets a much broader view of what's going on in Mars.
Exactly. So tell us a little bit more about this partnership with Relativity, because they are aiming to disrupt the industry again by building rockets in 3D with 3D printers.
Yes.
So why is this partnership so important, and what are you aiming for with this partnership?
So the Terran vehicle is the vehicle that will inject us into the Mars orbit. And that vehicle, so Terran 1 is on the launch pad right now at Cape Canaveral. And the Terran R is just going to be a size up of that. That vehicle is going to provide low-cost access to space. And it's very important to think about space in terms of access, because without low cost, the barrier to entry of getting to an orbit that then can allow you to go to deeper parts of space can be high. Well, what's happening is the cost per kilogram is going from where it used to be in the thousands of dollars to, and I'll use US dollars, down to low thousands, and it's going to go below 1,000. And at some point here in the not too distant future, it's going to go below $100 a kilogram. And then one concept I like to think about is, if it were free, okay, it's not going to be, but if it were free to get to low Earth orbit, what happens to commerce in space? And that's the way we need to think about space.
So let's talk about your timeline. We have a very good opportunity in 2024 because Mars is getting closer to Earth. Also in 2026, how do you look at this mission in terms of the timeline?
It's a great question. We are going to take advantage of the first Mars window coming up, and that is in late 2024. And our intent is that we will take advantage of every Mars window that appears from there on. So that's roughly 2.2 years every sequence. And on top of that, we hope that we can do multiple missions for every window. And that allows us to support the science and the commerce that people want to do.
That is very interesting also, because we are still targeting for humans to go to Mars, of course. I remember when we hosted the International Astronautical Congress here in Mexico in 2016, it was everything about Mars, the journey to Mars. And I remember being in a room with all the leaders from the space agencies around the world, and Charles Bolden talking about how they wanted them to join the journey to Mars. So we are still targeting for humans to set foot on Mars in the next decades. But we need to build things first there for everything to be prepared for humans getting there. How is this missions and this continuous missions going to help this goal?
Just by being able to land and look at something as simple as landing sites and being able to survey them on the surface as opposed to from orbit around Mars will help others when they want to land on Mars. Being able to understand having sensors to understand the environments. Again, I talked about looking for life form. Finding life form, evidence of life form is going to be very instrumental in understanding, okay, where are places to go that are of interest. So actually being able to put small rovers and navigate, or helicopters and navigate larger parts of Mars. All of that allows us to have much more information about what's actually there. What do we want to look for in detail, not from afar?
That's very important, because what happens if we really find life forms on Mars? Will this be some sort of obstacle, or maybe it will draw more attention and we will have more budgets and more interest in exploring Mars? What do you think about that?
It's going to be a little of both. I mean, once we find evidence, especially if it's evidence of life on Mars right now, again, I have no idea, but I'm just postulating here, then I think the excitement factor will go way up. But on the other hand, concepts like planetary protection are very real. And we're much cognizant that we have to abide by planetary protection to protect the environment there.
So you come from a communications background, and different experiences, not always focused on space exploration. And now with this mission and many other missions and companies that are building on having more capabilities of accessing space, we have many opportunities for many professionals to be involved in this journey. How do you think everyone could contribute? I mean, not the obvious careers, not the obvious professionals, but also everyone else.
I think there's, just as in all missions, there's everything from logistics to supplies to mission planning, the supply chain. All of it feeds into being able to do this mission over and over again. So across the board, I mean, we have people excited that are suppliers that are saying, yeah, supporting you to be able to do this mission is pretty amazing. Being able to be associated with the Mars concept at all is pretty amazing.
You just talked about how you got like a really high percentage of appliers to your company when you announced that you were going to Mars, right?
That's correct. Yes, we have an applicant system, and not only did we get applications from professionals, engineers, other folks, but also a lot of applicants for internships that we hadn't seen before. And it's because they get a chance to work on a project that's very, very unique.
Exactly. We have a question here from John. He says he's asking if you can talk a little bit more about the upcoming development and milestones for the Terran R rocket. I don't know if you have any more details. I mean, we know that the Terran 1 is very likely to be launching in a few weeks, maybe.
Yeah, I'm afraid, John, that it's going to be a little difficult to talk about Terran R. That is Relativity Space's business. And other than the fact that we are definitely going to be on a Terran R, and it's going to be a very capable rocket, similar to a Falcon 9 class rocket. That other than that, probably those questions are best directed to Relativity.
Exactly. Maybe one of the biggest obstacles that professionals in the aerospace sector feel for their development is feeling that they have to generate a whole new technology. But you were saying how we can build over the things that have already worked before.
It's a great point. Innovation is wonderful, and I've certainly been part of companies where we've innovated. And innovation also has another effect, and that's when one innovates, then the product you work for will probably be a bit more expensive and certainly take more time. And for the Mars mission, especially making a 2024 window, we want to be low cost, and we need to be efficient on time. And everything we're doing in the design is very much going after designs that we have seen before. We're replicating major parts of the InSight mission that already took place. including for the lander design for various parts like the heat shield, so that we don't have to reinvent it. And more importantly, the amount of testing that's that's taken place to understand the dynamics of a parachute, understand the dynamics of a heat shield, how the lander will land. All of that is lessons that have been learned by people. We'll just take advantage of those lessons and not have to repeat the science because it's already there. Now, is there a unique analysis we have to do? You bet. Lots of it. Lots of testing, verification, all of that goes hand in hand. But boy, it's much easier when we're not building brand new technology on engines or guidance or anything else.
And in the way, who knows, we can find something innovative and different.
Mm-hmm.
So Janet is asking, is this a proof of concept to beat others to the red planet, to show that it is possible? Why now?
Proof of concept, I would not use that term. I'd call it much more of a first commercial mission. We intend to have the payload, and it's not something we'll announce right now, but it will definitely be a payload that will be on Mars. And so most definitely our first commercial mission. Others have been there before, and we will be there as the first commercial mission, but we're not necessarily in a contest to, quote, beat others to the planet, as much as we want to be aggressive and get there as soon as we can, because we also want to do repeat missions.
Can commercial space do it cheaper and simpler than other government agencies and things like that?
There's two parts to it. There's the non-recurring portion and there's the recurring portion. On the non-recurring portion, as I mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of work already done that we don't have to reinvent, that we can take advantage of. And so we highly reduce the non-recurring portion. On the recurring portion, it's very much looking at ways, same as the launch business for rockets. In that similar fashion, we're looking at ways to do reduction of costs on everything from valves, switches, structures, engine designs that we already know we can do because of our past experience.
This question from Allison, I think it's very interesting because space exploration has a very humane part of it, because this is an ambition that we humans have to explore further. So she says, from a people perspective, how do you build a company that can accomplish such an ambitious goal?
Wow, that is the challenge that we have. We have the pleasure of a number of us are former SpaceX folks, and there were many very good lessons learned that came out for all of us, especially from Tom Mueller, our CEO, on how to operate a cost-efficient, execution-oriented organization. And that is the culture that we're actively building inside the company. We're focused very much on how do we get to low-cost space and how do we do it effectively.
After this initial mission, what are the next goals? I mean, you talked about having recurrent missions to Mars, but what other goals are you targeting?
It's a great question. Yes, we're going to Mars. We have the 2024 window that we're going to be launching against, but we do have other things that are also occupying our time, and that is to support the infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier, the space infrastructure needed to support Earth. And so in late next year, and we'll announce more specifics later, that we will be on a mission. We're already set for a mission that is going to low Earth orbit with a customer, and that we will be doing that mission again in 24. And that will be with a small vehicle. We'll have a mission also with the mid-sized vehicle, missions, I should say, plural, in 2024. And then in 2025, we plan that we will have our large vehicle in flight. So a little bit busy along with Mars.
Just a little bit busy. Do you think private human missions to Mars are viable at this point? Oh, I mean,
Cer-
not right now, but
Certainly, that's not what we're oriented towards. We're definitely oriented towards payloads. And yes, I'll have to point to SpaceX. And Elon definitely intends to do that. And we're going to support him as much as we possibly can.
that is amazing. What would you say to young people all over the world that maybe, I mean, they are going to be watching this mission and inspiring themselves because now they can do it. I mean,
Yes.
they can build a company from scratch. They don't just they don't need the complete support of the state or of a national agency. They can build from scratch. What would you say to them?
It's a great question because I've been very fortunate to be part of companies that have really changed the way that we work on the planet. And my early days at Qualcomm had the vision of the mobile phone that we have now all in our pockets way back in the early 90s. SpaceX had the vision of making space much more accessible and doing it in a fashion that made it much more affordable. And with Impulse, we plan to have this commercial highway to Mars as well as space infrastructure. What does that tell everyone, not only the students and those that are studying for it, but also professionals? Dream big. It can happen. The only rules you actually have to follow are physics and economics, but everything else, they're probably artificial. And that's what those companies realized is there are a number of artificial rules that are put in place, but as long as you don't defy physics, you can actually do a lot. And so landing the first stage of a Falcon 9 proved to a large number of folks, no, that's not a physics thing. That was just something that was a constraint that was dreamed up. I go back to a really old analogy. For the longest time, the 5 minute mile was considered no human can ever go faster than this. And then someone broke that barrier, and guess what? The next day, everybody started breaking that barrier. And so space is the same. We're all going to work to make the incentive for much more to happen in space.
And what do you think about international cooperation? Are you interested in involving other countries, other companies, other people from different scopes to join this mission and this journey?
Without question, I want this commercial highway to Mars, to be accessible to countries around the world, and be something that other science communities can take advantage of. So yes, it's very much something we're looking forward to.
What would you say to those countries that think that maybe going to Mars is not one of their priorities?
It may not be. They may have domestic and other issues that they need to be focused on. However, without a vision of where your country can go in terms of not only space but other issues, that without that vision, it leads to just completely tactical thinking. And for all of us, whether it's a large organization, a country, a company, without a strategic thought process, and not only just addressing the technical issues of today, it makes it difficult to really grow.
We have another question from York, and the question is: when does Impulse plan to scale production of its Martian landers?
So we are moving into a large facility. We're right now in a smaller facility. We're moving into a larger 60,000 square foot facility here in a couple months. And that facility will be able to support the missions that we have in mind for Mars, as well as the ones for Earth orbit.
What is the biggest technical challenge for Impulse right now?
It's all about execution. Yes, we have designs that we're working on, but things like propulsion systems, we have two propulsion systems, a 5-pound thruster and a 180-pound thruster that we've done many cycles on. We'll have the first system qualified here shortly, the second system after that. So those kind of technical, I mean, for space systems, for space vehicles, propulsion systems lead everything else. And we've really gone a long ways on that kind of technical area. But structures we have already in design, avionics we have in design, software we have in design. So yes, it's all about technical execution.
What are the biggest lessons that you've learned along all this way?
So first of all, we are not that old of a company. So the company is taking advantage of the experience that all of us have. But yes, lessons learned. I think it's more about the theme of thinking big and thinking in the future, and not necessarily thinking in the box, but really, to use the old cliche, think beyond the box. Think of the rules you don't have to follow because they're artificial.
Maybe not as a company with Impulse, but personally, what lessons have helped you to have this vision, this big vision, and to aim higher?
It's a difficult question to answer succinctly, but being a professional in an organization like this is a balance between thinking big, looking ahead, looking broad, but then every day one has to execute. I'm chief operating officer. That means I have a number of organizations that need to get things done today, as well as changing your brain and going, oh, but I have to think about what is the next steps of where we want to go, all at the same time. It's pretty difficult to do that all the time.
We have another question from Paul. What top factors distinguish Impulse from other in-space transportation
Great
companies?
question. Yeah. All right. It's a great question because what we have is a vehicle fleet that can address all of the orbits and the services that need to be provided that I don't believe, no, I know no other organization has. And in order to build that infrastructure in space, we have to have the fleet of vehicles. On top of that, we're looking at the broader commercial market to say, all right, what services, what missions do we have to support across the board? And that thought process will drive the vehicles, will drive the capabilities that are needed in space. So looking at what is the infrastructure model is kind of the big difference in how we execute on it.
Do you envision missions to other planetary bodies?
So right now we are sticking with inner solar system. Inner solar system means the outskirts are Mars. Do we plan to go to the moon? Yeah, definitely. We will do lunar missions, cislunar for sure, and that's something that I guess one could say we're kind of doing the hard one first. That's Mars, and then coming to the easier one. That's the moon. Is there a notion that we may go to Venus? Possibly, but right now we've got our hands pretty full with what we have on our plate.
What about asteroids or other smaller bodies?
Yes. Yes, the answer is yes. And we certainly are engaging in discussions with companies that have those aspirations.
What about we talked about reusability, how this is going to be a very important component for these missions to become cheaper and more available and accessible for everyone. Is there any sort of plan in having a vehicle that could come back, that could be really reusable?
It's a great question because in order to, again, using the metric cost per kilogram or cost per kilogram per kilometer, whatever one wants to use for in space, can be reduced dramatically by reusability. In the case of something like Mars, this is where we, again, can take advantage of what others are going to do. NASA has the Mars Sample Return mission. A lot is going to be learned by that mission. and we'll be able to take advantage of what NASA learns. So yeah, that's a very challenging mission. The amount of energy to do both, go there, come back, will do a lot to drive requirements. So yes, we intend to do that, but we will definitely follow the science that others learn.
What about reusability, low Earth orbit?
Without question, around orbits around the Earth and even lunar are going to take advantage of reusability. Right now, we're doing what's called last mile deliveries. We ride on a rocket, go to an orbit, and then do final deliveries to an orbit that the payload wants to go to. But with refueling facilities, that a vehicle can just stay on orbit, be refueled, and then the cost of the mission essentially comes down to the cost of propellant. And then building an infrastructure of vehicles around, let's say for low Earth orbit, for LEO, having a constellation of vehicles around different planes and orbits will allow for the essentially a tow truck service, if you will, or a service just to move payloads from orbit to orbit, or being able to host them on their orbits. All of that is well within the capabilities of what we can do.
We have another question here. It says, you mentioned the deep space network communications, which
Yes.
are very important for these missions. Do you envision Impulse in privately adding to this network over time?
Great question, because the Deep Space Network, DSN, has been a valuable asset. It's also a very well-used asset and much more capability, given the missions that we all plan to have in space, are just increasing the demands on that. The good news is there are a number of companies that have plans to develop their own version of the DSN and take advantage of the commerce that's coming, the communications demands that are coming. So will Impulse Space do such a thing? Right now, I don't think so, because I think there are other companies. Now, would we deliver orbiters to Mars that can supplement the communications or other capabilities? Possibly. That's certainly something we've had discussions about, but there are other companies that are also considering those things. So the good news is multiple paths to achieve a goal.
We also have been thinking about the future of the International Space Station, for example, and other space stations that may appear in the near future, maybe Axiom or other companies that could be building space stations to fill in this gap that the International Space Station is going to leave. Do you plan on collaborating with all these endeavors?
It's a great question. Supporting the logistics necessary for any of the commercial space stations that are being considered is a key part of the kind of commerce that's going to be built around space. So whether it's for space stations, for humans, or for other processing, whether it's for capsules that go on orbit to do space-based processing for microgravity production or other capabilities or testing, or whether it's other observation platforms, all of that is going to be facilitated by having a further presence on orbit.
So we're coming to the end of this conversation, unfortunately. We have another question. Would you consider partnering with NASA or others on precursor science or other missions?
Very short answer is yes, yes, yes.
Yes, of course, you're partnering with everyone. So we're coming to an end, but we really want to know how to follow Impulse, how to follow the mission, how to engage with everything that you're doing to get all the latest updates, maybe when you're revealing the payloads and other important milestones that you're going to get in the very, very near future.
Easiest, of course, is our website, impulsespace.com. But we are also on social media. So follow us on Twitter and actually on LinkedIn also. So those are paths that are easy to follow and easy to find us. But we will be making a number of announcements as we progress. Right now, we're pretty much heads down, working on the vehicles, working on the mission designs, and yes, at the end of the year, you're going to start seeing much more streaming of releases about what we're up to.
How would you recommend people to engage with space activities? I mean, for someone that that has no idea how to approach, how to get involved, what would you recommend?
I consider that right now there's so many ways to be involved in space, whether it's the media around space, whether it's the analysis around space, whether it's a company that's working on something in space. I mean, the options are so numerous. There are so many companies doing Earth observation, so many companies looking at communications, so many companies that are supporting all of the supplies that these companies need. There are large companies, there are smaller companies. It's just the choices actually are pretty broad.
That's what's amazing about space, that
Yes.
there's space for everyone in space.
I didn't say that.
So Home Eyes asks, and I think it's a very, very good question to start rounding this conversation. Do you have any personal or professional heroes, or perhaps experiences from your childhood, maybe one, that influence your work today?
Wow. Let's see. I'm going to give a shout out to Irwin Jacobs, the founder of Qualcomm. He and Andy Viterbi created it, but Irwin is a massively smart person. He saw what we now know as the iPhone early on, and had a big vision. So that was inspirational. You can't. I'm going to do what lots of folks do, and that's mention Elon. Elon. I had the pleasure of working with him, and he's a very smart guy. And to give credit, I mean, not only is he a smart guy, he is the modern day industrialist that we haven't seen in quite some time. The ability to just think out of the box and see and realize a possibility that otherwise is not seenable. So, but there's so many people that have just accomplished many things. It's hard to just nail down one or two, but I've been fortunate to be able to work in organizations with these two individuals.
Well, thank you very much, Barry. It was a really interesting and inspiring conversation. Everyone that is right now watching this conversation will be very interested in following the next steps of Impulse. Thank you for engaging with all of our audience. And we are looking forward to all these announcements and all the development of this mission. Thank you so much in the name of Explore Mars. And I hope this is not the last time that we can talk about this mission.
We'll talk again. Thanks for having me. A lot of fun.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Anna and Barry. Great conversation. Very exciting. Before everybody leaves, just want to make a couple of announcements about what's coming up with Explore Mars. We have another webinar coming up on December 7th at noon Eastern Daylight Time, or Standard Time by then, actually, with composer Nami Melamad. Nami is the first female composer to compose music for a Star Trek series, so she'll be talking about that, as well as her composition for the most recent Thor movie, as well as the challenges of basically inspiring young female composers in a field that's traditionally been male-dominated. We also have, of course, the Humans to Mars Summit coming up next year on May 16th through 18th, 2023 at the National Academy of Sciences building in Washington. It's shaping up to be our biggest yet. So by all means, register. Go to our website, register now to get your early registration before the price goes up. This is really shaping up probably to be the best one yet. So we would love for you to be there. And we have a huge 2023 coming up, a lot of new programs, which we'll be announcing soon. So stay tuned. We'll also probably be slipping a few extra webinars coming up by the end of the year as well. So I hope you have a good day, and we hope we'll see you at future programs. Thank you.